This conversation is powered by Google Illuminate. Check out illuminate.google.com for more. Welcome to today's discussion. We'll be delving into a standard operating procedure, or SOP, for surrendering EPF exemptions. This document outlines the process for establishments to voluntarily relinquish their exemption from the Employees Provident Fund EPF scheme. What are the primary reasons behind establishments choosing to surrender their exemptions, according to this SOP?
The SOP highlights two main reasons. First, some establishments find it difficult to match the benefits provided under the EPF scheme with their own internal arrangements. Second, there's a growing trust in the EPFO's publicly delivered services. This suggests a shift in confidence and perception of the EPFO's capabilities.
That's interesting. The SOP mentions Section 17 of the EPF Act. What role does this section play in the surrender process?
Section 17(4) states that an exemption can only be canceled by the authority that granted it if an employer fails to comply with the prescribed conditions. However, the SOP clarifies that this doesn't prevent an employer from voluntarily requesting cancellation of their exemption.
So it's a voluntary process, but with clear legal backing. Can you walk us through the key steps involved in a surrender process from the establishment's perspective?
The establishment needs to submit an application, Form SE1, to the appropriate government through the Regional Provident Fund Commissioner, RPFC, at least 30 days before the intended surrender date. This application requires several documents, including a board resolution, audit reports, and details of the trust's funds. They also need to transfer past accumulations, PA, to the Central Board of Trustees, CBT.
What are the responsibilities of the regional office, RO, once they receive the application?
The RO conducts a basic scrutiny, verifies the application against their records, and ensures compliance with the requirements. They may order a third-party audit of the trust funds, the cost of which is borne by the employer. If everything checks out, the RO issues an order, Form SE5, allowing the establishment to comply as an unexempted unit.
And what happens after the RO gives permission for unexempted compliance?
The RO then processes the surrender proposal, forwarding a draft agenda, Form SE2, to the zonal office, ZO. The ZO certifies the facts and sends it to the head office, HO, with recommendations. The HO scrutinizes the proposal, presents it to the Exempted Establishments Committee, EEC, and the CBT, and finally communicates the CBT's decision to the appropriate government.
The SOP emphasizes timelines. Are there specific timeframes outlined for each stage of the process?
Yes, the SOP provides a detailed matrix of timelines and responsibilities for each stage, from the initial application to the final government notification. For example, the RO has 30 days to process the application after the establishment starts complying as an unexempted unit.
The SOP mentions several forms, SE1 through SE7. What is the purpose of these forms?
These forms standardize the documentation required at each stage of the process. They ensure consistency and clarity in the information exchanged between the establishment, the RO, ZO, and HO.
The SOP also includes a section on monitoring mechanisms. How is the process monitored?
Monitoring happens at multiple levels. Monthly reviews at the HO, fortnightly reviews at the ZO and RO, and monthly reports from the ZO to the HO. This ensures accountability and timely processing of applications.
What happens if an establishment has outstanding dues or compliance issues? Does that affect the surrender process?
The SOP clarifies that the surrender proposal isn't withheld due to non-payment of dues other than the admitted PA dues. However, legal action for any other defaults is initiated separately.
The SOP mentions a third-party audit. Why is this necessary?
The third-party audit verifies the financial health of the trust fund, ensuring that all funds are accounted for and that there are no outstanding liabilities before the exemption is surrendered.
What about the role of the Central Board of Trustees, CBT?
The CBT plays a crucial role in reviewing the proposal after it's been processed by the RO, ZO, and HO. Their recommendation is then sent to the appropriate government for final approval.
The SOP seems quite comprehensive. What are some of the key benefits of having such a detailed procedure?
A well-defined SOP ensures transparency, efficiency, and consistency in the surrender process. It minimizes ambiguity, reduces potential delays, and protects the interests of both the establishments and the EPFO.
This has been a helpful discussion on the intricacies of surrendering EPF exemptions. Thank you. This conversation is powered by Google Illuminate. Check out illuminate.google.com for more. Today's discussion centers around a crucial document from the Employees Provident Fund organization detailing a standard operating procedure for surrendering EPF exemptions. It's a complex topic, but vital for understanding how businesses transition from exempted to non-exempted status under the EPF Act.
Indeed. The surrender process isn't simply a matter of paperwork. It involves significant financial implications and legal considerations for both the establishment and its employees.
Exactly. And the SOP aims to streamline this process, ensuring a smooth transition. What are some of the key challenges this SOP addresses?
One major challenge is standardizing the procedures across different regional offices. Previously, there was a lack of uniformity, leading to inconsistencies and delays.
So this SOP aims to create a consistent nationwide approach?
Precisely. It outlines clear responsibilities, timelines, and required documentation, and minimizing ambiguity and streamlining the entire process.
Let's start with the introduction. The document highlights a growing trend: exempted establishments voluntarily surrendering their exemptions. Why is this happening?
Primarily, it's a twofold reason. Some establishments find it difficult to match the benefits offered under the EPF scheme, while others have increasing confidence in the EPFO's improved services. The SOP formalizes this voluntary surrender process, which was previously less clearly defined.
And the purpose of the SOP itself is to standardize the administrative procedures, supersede older, potentially conflicting instructions, and establish a monitoring mechanism. This sounds like a significant improvement in clarity and efficiency.
Absolutely. It clarifies the documents, formats, channels, and timelines involved, addressing operational issues that previously caused delays and confusion. The monitoring mechanism also ensures accountability and allows for feedback and stakeholder management.
The SOP's scope is broad, covering everything from the format of surrender proposals to the handling of special cases, such as closed establishments. This comprehensive approach is crucial for effective implementation.
Precisely. It aims to provide a clear roadmap for establishments, standardizing procedures for EPFO, and specifying methods for handling various scenarios. The definitions section is also critical, ensuring everyone understands the terminology used throughout the document.
The definition section is indeed crucial for clarity. Terms like appropriate government, CBT, and past accumulation are clearly defined, preventing any misinterpretations.
Yes, this is essential to avoid confusion and ensure consistent application of the FOP across all stakeholders. The clear rescissions of key terms like surrender and surrender date are particularly important.
The SOP clearly outlined the responsibilities of various stakeholders, including the establishment, regional offices, zonal offices, and the head office. Can you elaborate on these roles?
Certainly. The establishment is responsible for preparing the application, gathering necessary documents, and transferring past accumulations. Regional offices scrutinize applications, verify facts, and permit compliance as an unexempted establishment. Zonal offices certify facts and forward proposals to the head office, which then interacts with the appropriate government for final approval.
The specific procedures section is quite detailed, outlining the steps involved in submitting the application, verifying documents, and processing the surrender request. What are some of the key steps for the establishment?
The establishment must submit a complete application, Form SE1, including an undertaking to cover any potential losses during the transition, a copy of the exemption notification, and audited financial statements. They also need to transfer past accumulations, PA, to the CBT, a process detailed in Section 17 of the Act and Para 28 of the scheme. Failure to meet these requirements can lead to penalties.
And what about the role of the regional office in verifying the application and ensuring compliance?
The regional office plays a crucial role in verifying the completeness of the application and ensuring that all necessary documents are submitted. They also conduct a basic scrutiny of the application and verify the facts based on office records. They then issue an order permitting compliance as an unexempted establishment. They also oversee the transfer of past accumulations and initiate any necessary legal action for noncompliance.
The SOP also includes several forms and templates, SE1 through SE7, to standardize the documentation process. This should significantly reduce administrative burden and improve efficiency.
Absolutely. These forms provide a structured approach to collecting and organizing the necessary information, ensuring consistency and completeness. The use of standardized forms minimizes the risk of missing crucial information.
The SOP includes a matrix outlining timelines and responsibilities for each stage of the process. This is crucial for ensuring timely processing of surrender requests.
Yes, the timelines are clearly defined, setting expectations for each stakeholder and helping to prevent delays. The monitoring mechanism, involving monthly and quarterly reviews at different levels, ensures accountability and allows for early identification and resolution of any issues.
The monitoring mechanism is particularly important for maintaining transparency and accountability. The monthly reports from zonal offices to the head office provide a valuable overview of the process.
The reporting structure ensures that progress is tracked effectively, allowing for timely intervention if any delays or problems arise. This proactive approach is crucial for maintaining the efficiency of the entire process.
The SOP mentions that this is the first version, with no modifications proposed at this time. However, future updates are likely as the process evolves.
Naturally, any SOP is a living document and will likely require updates as experience is gained and the process is refined. The inclusion of internal and external references ensures that the SOP is consistent with existing regulations and guidelines.
The inclusion of Annexure 1, listing superseded circulars, is also a valuable addition, ensuring that only the most up-to-date instructions are followed.
This is crucial for avoiding confusion and ensuring that all stakeholders are working with the most current information. It prevents the application of outdated or conflicting instructions.
The miscellaneous section addresses important points such as the requirement for third-party audits and the change history of the SOP. The requirement for a third-party audit is particularly important for ensuring the financial integrity of the process.
The third-party audit provides an independent verification of the financial health of the trust fund, ensuring transparency and accountability. The change history section is also important for tracking modifications and updates to the SOP over time.
Form SE1, the application for surrender of exemption, is a critical document that requires a significant amount of information from the establishment.
It's a comprehensive form designed to capture all the necessary information for processing the surrender request. The detailed checklist ensures that all required documents are submitted, minimizing delays and ensuring a smooth transition. The inclusion of sections on member grievances and past accumulations is particularly important.
Forms SE2 through SE7 further streamline the process by providing standardized formats for various stages of the surrender process. This consistency is key to efficiency.
Each form plays a specific role in the process, from the checklist for regional office verification, SE2, to the final communication to the appropriate government, SE4. The use of standardized forms ensures that all necessary information is collected and organized consistently. Form SE6, the past accumulation statement, is particularly important for ensuring accurate transfer of funds to employees.
Annexure J provides a standard template for the notification of exemption cancellation, while Annexure L offers a draft template for reporting the surrender process. These templates ensure consistency and communication.
These templates ensure that all communications are clear, concise, and consistent, minimizing the risk of misinterpretations. The standardized format facilitates efficient processing of the surrender request.
Overall, this SOP represents a significant improvement in the process of surrendering EPF exemptions. The clear guidelines, standardized forms, and monitoring mechanisms should significantly improve efficiency and transparency.
The SOP's comprehensive approach addresses many of the challenges previously encountered in the surrender process. The clear delineation of responsibilities, timelines, and procedures should lead to a more streamlined and efficient process for all stakeholders. The emphasis on transparency and accountability is also commendable.
The detailed nature of the SOP, while potentially lengthy, is ultimately beneficial in ensuring clarity and minimizing the potential for errors or delays. The inclusion of multiple forms and annexures ensures that all necessary information is collected and organized effectively.
The comprehensive nature of the SOP is a strength. It anticipates potential issues and provides clear guidance on how to address them. This proactive approach minimizes the risk of delays and ensures a smoother transition for establishments surrendering their exemptions. The emphasis on compliance and the potential penalties for non-compliance are also important deterrents to ensure the integrity of the process.
The clear emphasis on compliance and the potential penalties for non-compliance is a crucial aspect of the SOP. It ensures that establishments understand the importance of adhering to the guidelines and completing all necessary steps in a timely manner.
The potential penalties serve as a strong incentive for establishments to comply with the SOP. This ensures that the process is carried out fairly and efficiently, protecting the interests of both the establishments and their employees. The detailed nature of the SOP, while potentially lengthy, is ultimately beneficial in ensuring clarity and minimizing the potential for errors or delays.
So in conclusion, this SOP provides a much-needed framework for a previously less defined process. Its comprehensive nature and attention to detail should significantly improve efficiency and transparency.
The SOP's success will depend on consistent implementation across all regional offices. Regular monitoring and feedback mechanisms are crucial for identifying and addressing any challenges that may arise.
That was a great discussion. Thank you for your insights.
This conversation is powered by Google Illuminate. Check out illuminate.google.com for more. So we're diving deep into the world of EPF exemptions today. Sounds kind of dry, I know, but trust me, it's got some twists and turns. Think of it like a financial treasure hunt, but with way more paperwork.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of businesses find themselves really struggling with surrendering their EPF exemptions. It's not exactly straightforward.
Exactly. It's not just a simple form, it's a whole multi-stage process with strict timelines and responsibilities.
And huge financial implications for both the employer and employees. One little mistake, and you're looking at penalties. Big time.
So let's unravel this procedural mess, shall we? Okay, let's start with the intro. The SOP it points out this trend. More and more exempted establishments are giving up their exemptions. Why is that?
Well, it seems to be a few things. They can't match the benefits under the EPF scheme, And there's more trust in the EPFO's services now.
Right. Makes sense. So the point of this SOP is to standardize the whole surrender process. It replaces the old instructions and clarifies things, procedures and timelines.
Exactly. It's all about streamlining things, making it more efficient and transparent for everyone involved.
And to set up a system to keep everyone accountable, the scope is pretty broad. It covers everything from the format of the surrender proposals to handling special cases like, businesses that have closed down. Let's talk definitions. What's really important here?
The definition, they're key. You really need to understand terms like appropriate government, CBT, PA, that's past accumulations, and surrender date. They all have specific legal meanings.
Totally. Get those wrong and you're in trouble. The Act refers to the Employees Provident Fund and Miscellaneous Provisions Act, 1952. That's the basis of the whole thing.
And the scheme is the Employees Provident Fund Scheme, 1952. That's where you find the detailed rules and regulations. The relationship between the Act and the scheme is really important.
So knowing the legal framework is super important. Okay, let's talk responsibilities. What are the main roles and obligations of each player?
The establishment has a lot on its plate. They decide the surrender date, prepare a beneficiary list, get a third-party audit done, and transfer the past accumulations.
And the regional office, the RO?
The RO checks the application, verifies everything, makes sure they can comply as a non-exempted establishment, prepares a draft agenda, and make sure they get the past accumulations.
Then the zonal office, the ZO, certifies the facts and sends the draft agenda to the head office, the HO.
Right. The HO reviews the agenda, presents it to the Exempted Establishments Committee, the EEC, and the CBT, and then talks to the appropriate government.
So a clear division of labor, but each step is really important for a smooth process. Let's get into the specifics, starting with what the establishment needs to do. What's the first thing they do?
They submit an application form SE1 to the RPFC at least 30 days before the surrender date.
And what documents need to go with that application?
A whole bunch. An undertaking to cover any losses, a copy of the exemption notification, a board resolution, the compliance audit observations, details of the corpus, and more. It's a long list.
The establishment also pays for any third-party audit the RPFC orders.
Yes, and they have to transfer the past accumulations, the PA, by a certain deadline. Otherwise, there are penalties. People often forget that part.
The process for transferring special deposit scheme funds and securities is also detailed, showing how different groups are involved. Okay, now the regional office's role. What do they do after they get the application?
The RO does a thorough review, checking everything the establishment submitted. If anything's missing, they send it back.
They also check the financial health of the trust fund with a third-party audit.
Right. After the verification, the RPFC issues an order form SE5, allowing them to comply as a not-exempted establishment.
And they have to make sure the past accumulations are credited to the right UANs within 30 days.
Yes, and they take legal action if there are any defaults, even if the surrender process is still going on. That's a big point.
Then the RO prepares the draft agenda form SE2 to send to the ZO. The ZO checks the fact and sends the draft agenda form SE3 to the HO with its recommendations. And what happens at the HO?
The HO reviews the agenda, presents it to the EEC and CBT, and then sends everything to the appropriate government.
The HO also follows up with the appropriate government until they get the official cancellation notice. That makes sure the whole process is finished.
The timelines are all clearly laid out at each stage, showing how important it is to act quickly.
And the different forms, SE1 to SE7, are all part of the process, making sure the documentation is standardized. The SAP lists all the forms, each one for a specific part of the process. The timelines are really important, aren't they?
Absolutely. The SOP has a detailed chart showing the timelines and responsibilities at each stage, from submitting the application to the final government notification.
And the monitoring system keeps everyone accountable, the HO, ZO, and RO. They do regular reviews to track progress.
That ensures efficiency and helps solve any problems that might come up.
The monthly and quarterly reports give a complete picture how the process is going. This is the first version of the SOP, so there aren't any modifications planned right now.
What about references?
The SOP refers to internal circulars, they're in Annexure 1, and external references, giving the whole context for the procedure. Including Annexure 1, which lists the circulars that are no longer used, is important for clarity.
It makes sure everyone is using the most current information.
Wow, that was a lot. We covered the main points of this SOP, giving a good understanding of how to surrender EPF exemptions. Thanks for your expertise.
All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at something pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, what's that?
It's a standard operating procedure,
Okay.
or an SOP. It's from, of all places, the Indian Ministry of Labor and Employment.
I see.
And it's dated October 30th, 2023.
Okay.
So, last year. But it might actually be relevant to you even in 2025.
Wow, okay. I'm intrigued. So what's this SOP all about?
Well, it's about surrendering EPF exemptions.
Surrendering EPF exemption. See, this is what I love about these deep dives. We always end up looking at the most unexpected things.
Right. And what's really fascinating here is that we're seeing a real trend of establishments deciding to give up these exemptions.
Interesting. So this SOP isn't just some theoretical document. It's actually reflecting something that's happening right now.
Exactly.
Okay, so before we dive into the details, can we do a quick level set for our listeners who might not be familiar with all the ins and outs of Indian labor law? What exactly are we talking about when we say EPF exemptions?
So basically, when we talk about EPF exemptions, we're talking about certain organizations that have opted out of managing their employees' provident fund through the standard EPFO channel.
Okay, so they're kind of doing their own thing.
Yeah, exactly. They manage a separate fund, and they often cite things like, greater investment control, or maybe just more confidence in their own capabilities.
Makes sense, but this SOP is about giving up that exemption, right?
Exactly. And that's kind of the head scratcher here. Why would an establishment reverse course?
Yeah, that does seem counterintuitive.
What's the motivation?
It's a good question. There are a couple of potential drivers here. It could be that we're seeing greater trust in the EPFO itself. Maybe they've just improved their services.
Okay.
Or maybe there's more transparency now.
Right.
On the other hand, it could be tied to just changing economic conditions. It might just not be as appealing for establishments to manage separate funds anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Or, and this is where things get a little bit more interesting, maybe there's a growing awareness of the risks associated with these exemptions, maybe some legal complexities.
Interesting. So the SOP, by laying out the process of surrendering this exemption, might actually be highlighting some of those complexities.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of this SOP. Who are the key players involved in this whole bureaucratic dance?
Well, you've got the establishment itself, obviously. They're the ones initiating the process. And then you've got the regional office. They're the sort of first point of contact, like the gatekeepers.
Okay.
And then from there, it moves up the ladder to the zonal office. They review everything and send it forward with recommendations. And then finally, you've got the head office. And they're the ones who actually present the case to the Exempted Establishments Committee. They call it the EEC. And also the Central Board of Trustees, the CBT.
Wow. So there's a lot of layers of scrutiny here.
Definitely. And at each level, there are very specific responsibilities and timelines.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's all outlined in the SOP. For example, the regional office has just 7 working days to do their initial scrutiny.
Wow. It's not a lot of time.
Right. And then they have 30 days for a more in-depth verification.
Well,
and they even outline how to handle different types of funds, like cash, special deposit schemes.
Special deposit schemes. What are those?
Oh, sorry. Think of them as fixed deposits, but specifically for organizations. Establishments might park some of their EPF funds in these schemes.
Okay.
And so when they surrender the exemption, transferring these funds back to the EPFO, it's a whole other process. It even involves specific banks and the Reserve Bank of India.
That sounds incredibly complicated.
It is. But, I think all this detail serves a purpose.
Oh, yeah. So?
I mean, it might seem like bureaucratic overkill, but it's actually a safeguard, right? We're talking about potentially huge amounts of money that are meant for people's retirement.
Right.
So all this meticulousness is really about preventing mismanagement and fraud.
That makes sense. It's about making sure that every rupee is accounted for.
Exactly.
And I guess if there are any missteps along the way, there are consequences.
Yeah, the SOP is very clear about that. There are penalties, especially when it comes to transferring what they call past accumulation.
Past accumulation.
Yeah, that's their official term for all the money that has accumulated in the establishment's separate EPF fund while they had that exemption.
Okay.
And they have to transfer all of that back to the EPFO within a specific time frame.
Oh, I see.
And yeah, if they're late, there are penalties.
So it's not just enough to say, okay, we're giving up the exemption. They have to actually meticulously account for all of that money.
Exactly. And that's just the beginning. They go into even more detail, outlining the forms, the procedures, even down to individual employee accounts.
Oh, wow. And speaking of employee accounts, I noticed that they mentioned KYC compliance.
Good catch. That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, what's the significance of that?
Well, including KYC, that's Know Your Customer, for anyone who doesn't know, it shows a trend in India towards tighter financial regulations.
I see.
You know, that there's a real crackdown on anything that seems suspicious. So in this context, it means that establishments need to have accurate, updated information on everyone who's getting those funds.
So it's all about making sure that the money ends up in the right hands.
Right. And this level of meticulousness, while it might not be the most exciting thing to read about, has real consequences.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for both establishments and employees. For establishments, it's a reminder that surrendering the exemption doesn't erase everything that happened before.
Oh, you mean like if there were any issues during the exemption period?
Exactly. The regional office can still investigate and potentially take action.
So it's not like a clean slate.
Not at all. They really emphasize that.
So this SOP isn't just about following a process. It's about making sure everything was above board during the exemption period.
Right.
Wow. Okay. So even though this is just one document, it tells us a lot about how things are changing in India.
Yeah, it really does. And we're just scratching the surface.
Well, then let's keep digging.
It really is fascinating how much we can learn from just one document.
It is. We were just talking about those potential consequences, for establishments that maybe weren't completely by the book during their exemption. What happens after they actually transfer those past accumulations back to the EPFO? Like, is that it?
Not quite. It doesn't just end there.
Oh.
Remember all those different government bodies we talked about?
Right.
They all have a role to play. So once that transfer is done, the regional office, we have to publish a notice.
A notice, like where?
In the official gazette. It's basically a public declaration.
Oh, okay.
That the establishment's fund is now officially under the control of the Central Board of Trustees, and that their employees are now part of the EPFO.
So it's not just an internal thing, it's a very public announcement. Is that just a formality, or is there more to it?
I think it's both. On a legal level, it makes the whole transition official. There's no question about who controls the fund and who the beneficiaries are.
I see.
But practically speaking, it also means that those employees, they now have all the same rights and protections as any other EPFO member.
That's good. It gives them peace of mind.
Exactly.
Knowing they're not stuck in some weird limbo. But we talked earlier about the possibility of penalties, even after surrendering the exemption.
Yeah.
Does that still apply once they've published this notice?
This is where it gets interesting. The SOP is very explicit about this.
Oh.
Surrendering the exemption and transferring the funds doesn't wipe away any past issues. Yeah, so if there are any compliance problems or defaults during that exemption period, those can still be investigated.
Wow. Even after they're back under the EPFO?
Yep. The regional office can still take action.
That's a pretty strong message. They can't just rejoin the EPFO and expect everything to disappear.
Exactly. It underscores the importance of keeping good records and following the rules, even when they have that exemption.
So this SOP isn't just a guide, it's a warning.
I'd say so.
We've talked a lot about the establishments, but what about the employees? What does all of this mean for them?
Well, remember that KYC compliance we mentioned. That's a big one for them. But there's another important detail. The SOP really stresses the importance of getting those past accumulations into the individual accounts of each employee quickly.
Oh, you mean their UAN accounts?
Yes, exactly.
For anyone listening who might not be familiar, the UAN is the Universal Account Number. It's basically a unique ID for each employee's Provident Fund account.
Right, and it makes it much easier to track and manage.
And portable too.
Exactly. So the SOP says they should get those funds credited within 30 days of the transfer, ideally.
So they don't lose access to their savings during this whole process.
Right. It minimizes disruptions and maintains continuity.
This focus on the UAN and its role in this whole process is really interesting. It seems like India is moving more and more towards individual accounts and digital tracking for these social security programs.
It's a huge trend, and this SOP, even though it's about a very specific process, it shows that shift towards digital governance.
And transparency.
Exactly. It's not just about moving money around.
Right.
It's about giving individuals more control and making sure everyone is accountable.
So this one SOP is actually a window into some much bigger changes happening in India. It's amazing what you can learn from a document like this.
I know, right? And we're just getting started. There's still so much to uncover here.
Well, then let's keep peeling back those layers. All right, so we've really gone deep into the mechanics of surrendering these EPF exemptions, all the different steps, the players involved, even the potential consequences for anyone who, well, let's just say didn't quite follow the rules during that exemption period.
Right.
But now I'm really curious about that last question you brought up, the why behind all of this.
Yeah, it is the big question, isn't it? Why would so many organizations give up something that on the surface seems like a good thing to have?
Exactly, like it's a privilege.
Right, you'd think so.
So why give it up?
Well, I don't think it's quite as simple as saying that they've all suddenly decided the EPFO is the best thing since sliced bread.
Okay, so what are some of the other factors at play here?
Well, one possibility is that the EPFO has actually gotten a lot better. Maybe their services are more efficient now.
Okay.
Or they're more transparent.
Right.
Or maybe their investment returns have become more attractive.
That would make a difference.
Yeah, definitely. If organizations feel like their employees' money will be well managed, then why bother with the hassle of a separate fund?
Right. It all comes down to trust.
Absolutely. But we also have to think about the bigger picture, the things that are happening outside of just the EPFO.
Oh, you mean like the economy?
Exactly. The economic situation in India is always changing.
Yeah, it's true.
Regulations change, the market can be unpredictable, there are global trends that affect everything, so it's possible that managing a separate fund has just become more complicated, maybe even riskier in recent years.
So maybe it's less about suddenly loving bureaucracy and more about just being practical.
I think that's a big part of it, and we can't forget about the human element here either.
Oh, you mean the employees?
Yeah, employee expectations are changing, and people are more aware of their rights. So organizations might be feeling pressured to be more transparent, more fair. Sticking with the EPFO system could be a way to avoid potential conflicts.
Yeah, it kind of takes the guesswork out of it. Everyone knows the rules.
Exactly. And even if an organization is doing everything right with their separate fund, just the perception of a lack of transparency can really damage morale.
And in today's world, you can't afford to lose good employees.
It's just too competitive. So going with the EPFO, it kind of provides a sense of neutrality, standardization.
It's like a level playing field.
Exactly.
So this SOP, even though it's about a very specific process, it actually reveals a lot about what's happening in India, like in the workplace.
Definitely. It's a reminder that even something like a bureaucratic procedure can be influenced by all these bigger trends, economic factors, social changes, the balance of power between employers and employees.
Well, this deep dive has certainly given us a lot to think about. We've explored all the details of this SOP. We've talked about the possible reasons behind this trend. And we've even touched on some pretty big implications for the future. It's amazing how much you can learn from just one document.
It is, isn't it? That's what I love about these deep dives. We start with a very specific topic, and we end up uncovering all these layers of meaning. It's like an adventure.
It really is. So what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
Well, if this trend of surrendering exemptions continues, I think the big question is, what does that mean for the future of retirement in India? Is this a step toward a system that's more fair, more equal for everyone? Or are there some hidden problems we haven't considered yet? These are things everyone should be thinking about.
That's a great point. Lots to ponder for sure. And as always, dear listener, if you have any questions, any insights you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to reach out. Until next time, happy exploring.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into something pretty interesting, I think. We've got this form here. It's an application for surrender of exemption form from India. And it might sound kind of dry at first, but I promise it's actually pretty fascinating. It gives us a glimpse into how companies in India handle their employee retirement funds and the choices they face.
Oh, absolutely. This form opens a door into a whole system that most people don't even know exists. We're talking about choices, regulations, oversight, all when it comes to those all-important retirement savings. It's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, definitely. So before we get too far into the weeds here, let's back up for a sec. For those of us who don't spend all day thinking about Indian retirement funds, what is this exemption thing all about? Like, what are they actually exempt from?
Right, good question. So in India, the main organization that deals with retirement funds is called the Employee Provident Fund Organization, or EPFO for short. They're basically, they manage these funds, which are, retirement savings for employees, like a giant national piggy bank for everybody's golden years.
Okay, that makes sense. But this form, right, this is all about giving up an exemption from that system. So there are companies that don't have to play by the same rules as everybody else.
Exactly. So certain organizations, usually, especially larger ones, they can apply for an exemption from working directly with the EPFO. Instead, they set up their own trusts to manage these funds. So kind of like creating their own little internal piggy bank. It gives them a bit more control. Maybe they can tailor things to their specific needs, that sort of thing.
Got it. So that's where this form comes in. They're basically saying, okay, we're done with our own piggy bank. We're going back to the big national one. But why would they do that? It seems like managing your own funds would be, I don't know, more convenient or something.
Yeah, you'd think so, right? But it's not always that simple. Managing a trust, it comes with a lot of responsibility. We're talking audits, compliance, paperwork. It can be a real headache. Sometimes going back to the EPFO just feels like a simpler option, even if it means less freedom.
So it's a trade-off then, kind of, like flexibility versus simplicity.
Yeah, exactly. And there are other things to consider too, like maybe a company wants more transparency, or more oversight. The EPFO system is known for that. Or maybe their financial situation has changed, and it's just harder to manage that separate trust now.
Interesting. It's kind of like, I don't know, choosing between hiring a personal chef and just going to a really good restaurant. Both have their pluses, but it all depends what you're really looking for. Now, this form, though, it's not just a casual, hey, we're back kind of note. It's seems a lot more intense than that, at least from what I've seen.
Oh, absolutely. This form is all about accountability. Right. We're talking about people's retirement savings here. It's serious stuff. So the authorities want to be sure that everything is being done by the book, and that nobody is, getting shortchanged during this whole transition.
Makes sense, yeah. So walk us through this a little. What kind of information are they actually asking for on this form?
Well, first off, they want to know why the organization is giving up its exemption. There's literally like a section called Grounds of Surrender, where the company has to explain its reasoning. Kind of like a financial confession booth, right? Laying out all their reasons for making the switch.
Ooh, juicy. I love a good confession. So what are some of the reasons they might give, aside from the whole too much paperwork thing, I mean?
Well, sometimes, it's just a matter of expertise. Managing a trust properly, it requires some pretty specialized knowledge, and not every company has that in-house. So they might realize, hey, we're better off letting the professionals at EPFO handle this.
So it's kind of like admitting, hey, we tried to bake this cake ourselves, but it turned out kind of messy. We're better off just ordering from the bakery.
Perfect analogy. And sometimes it's about changes within the company itself, like maybe they've restructured or merged with another company, or they're facing, some financial difficulties. All those things can make managing a separate trust a lot less feasible.
Right, so it's not necessarily a sign of failure or anything. It's more about adapting to new circumstances.
Exactly. And the form, it allows them to be transparent about those circumstances. So you get a glimpse into the things that are driving their decision. And it highlights the fact that these are real situations, not just abstract regulations.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see the human side of all this paperwork. But there's got to be more to it than just explaining their reasons, right? What else do they have to spill?
Right, it goes much deeper than that. They need to lay out their financials in detail, show a complete breakdown of the trust's assets, liabilities, even their investment patterns. It's like a financial x-ray.
Yeah.
Gives the authorities a clear picture of how the funds have been managed.
So they're not just taking their word for it, it's all about verification.
Precisely. And it's not just about the numbers either. They also have to provide a whole bunch of supporting documents, audit reports, board resolutions, all sorts of things. This makes sure that the decision to surrender the exemption, it's been properly thought through, approved at all levels.
Wow, they're not messing around. It's like a whole financial obstacle course they got to navigate.
Exactly. But those hurdles, they're there for a reason. It's about protecting those retirement funds and making sure the transition back to the EPFO goes smoothly.
Okay, so I'm getting a sense of how seriously India takes this whole process. But we haven't even talked about the employees themselves. Like, where do they fit into all of this?
That's a great point, and it's something the form actually addresses directly. One of the required documents is, get this, consent of employees. They actually have a say in whether or not their company gives up its exemption.
Wait, hold on. They have a choice. That's pretty amazing. It's pretty empowering.
It is. It shows that the The system recognizes that employees are stakeholders in this process, right? That's
Yes.
their money, after all. And it's not just about giving consent either. They also have the right to be informed about what's happening.
So it's not just a, behind closed doors kind of decision. There's a level of transparency involved.
Exactly. The organization has to show proof that they've actually communicated with their employees about the surrender. Could be through notices, meetings, that kind of thing. The point is, the employees aren't left in the dark.
Okay, that's reassuring. So we've got the reasons for the surrender, the whole financial deep dive. We've even got employee involvement. But I'm guessing there's more to this form, right? This feels like just the tip of the iceberg.
You're absolutely right. We've only just scratched the surface here. There's still a lot more to uncover about how the timeline for this whole transition works, how the funds are actually transferred, and all the safeguards that are in place to make sure everything goes smoothly.
Well, let's keep digging then. This is turning out to be way more interesting than I initially expected. Who knew a form could be so full of intrigue? Okay, so we've talked about how this form is like this carefully planned out thing, right? Moving those retirement funds back to the EPFO. But what about the timing? Like, is it this mad rush, or do they have some breathing room to get everything in order?
Well, I'd say think of it more like a road trip, a well-planned one, that is.
Yeah.
You've got your route, and then maybe some flexibility along the way. And the form, it has a whole section just for the timeline, lays out all the key dates, deadlines, all that.
Okay, so walk me through this roadmap then. What are some of the milestones, the big things we should be watching for?
All right. Well, first up, there's this intended date for compliance. Basically, it's the date the organization is aiming to be back under the EPFOs, under their rules, fully compliant and ready to go.
So it's like setting a target, right? A finish line for this whole process.
Exactly. Gives everybody a clear time frame to work towards. But they also build in some flexibility, which is, it's smart. There's also a proposed date, and this one can be, it can be a bit earlier. Gives them a little wiggle room to finalize everything,
Okay, so they set a goal, but they leave some space for for any detours they might encounter. Makes sense. What else is on this timeline?
Well, they had to say exactly how long they've been paying their dues for. It's really important because it makes sure all those contributions to the trust, they're all accounted for.
Yeah.
Right up to the point of, the surrender, no loose ends.
So it's like closing out a tab at a restaurant, making sure everything's paid for before you walk out the door.
Precisely. And they've also got to indicate the period for the period where the member accounts have been getting updated with interest. So it's making sure that the employees are getting all the interest they've earned right up to the date of transfer.
So it's not just about moving that main amount, right? It's about making sure that that money hasn't stopped growing just because they're switching systems.
Exactly. Every rupee counts, right?
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking retirement funds. It's like the form it's so well designed to make sure it's it's a fair transfer for everybody.
Going through all this, it's amazing how much we've already learned from just one form. It's like this document is, it's like a secret decoder ring or something for understanding how India, how they manage their whole employee benefit system.
It really is. And it shows, how important they consider those benefits to be. They've got this real commitment to transparency, accountability, making sure the transition is smooth for everybody, for everybody involved.
Speaking of transitions, I'm kind of curious about the actual handover of those funds. Like, does the company just write this giant check to the EPFO, or is it more complicated than that?
It's definitely more nuanced than just a check. Remember that detailed breakdown of their financials we were talking about? That's a big part of it.
Right, the financial X-ray of the trust. So they use that to figure out how much money needs to be transferred.
Exactly. The authorities, they need a clear picture of the trust's assets, their liabilities, how they've been investing, everything, before they can move anything. They're making sure every single rupee is accounted for.
So it's like this forensic accounting investigation, huh? Making sure everything adds up perfectly.
That's a great way to put it. And once they've got that clear picture, then the funds they're carefully transferred to individual EPFO accounts for each employee. So their savings, they stay separate, and their individual rights, they're all protected.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not just like one big pool of money. Each person's contributions are still, tracked individually.
Precisely. And remember those past accumulation statements. They're like a guide,
Yeah.
a financial passport for each employee's savings, making sure they arrive safe and sound in their new EPFO account.
It's really incredible, how much thought goes into every step of this. They're not leaving anything to chance.
Absolutely not. And it's not just about moving the money. It's about transferring that responsibility for managing those savings, for safeguarding them. The company's basically saying, okay, EPFO, it's your turn. We trust you to handle this.
So they're passing the torch, so to speak. But with all these safeguards we've been talking about, it sounds like the torch is in pretty good hands.
Exactly. Those safeguards, they're there to make sure everything goes smoothly, to protect the employees.
Yeah.
It's all about that commitment to retirement security.
We've talked a lot about the organization side of things, but I'm kind of curious to know more about the employee experience. We mentioned consent and the right to be informed, but what about their understanding of the whole process? Are they just told, "Hey, we're switching things up," or is there more to it than that?
That's a really important part of all of this. We have to remember, we're talking about people's livelihoods here. Their dreams to the future. They can't just be, passive bystanders.
So it's not just about, checking the box on a form. They need to really understand what's happening and why.
Precisely. It's all about, transparency and empowerment. The organization needs to do more than just tell them. They need to explain what the surrender means, how it'll affect their accounts, what they can expect moving forward.
It's like a financial education opportunity almost, helping them understand their rights, their options when it comes to their retirement savings.
Exactly, and that kind of communication, it can go a long way.
Right.
In building trust and getting rid of any anxiety the employees might have about this whole transition.
Makes sense. Nobody wants to feel like their savings, their hard-earned money is being, moved around without them really understanding what's going on.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another interesting point. So the form, it lays out this official process, right? But there's also this human element that we have to consider.
Oh, I like where this is going. Tell me more.
Okay, so imagine you're an employee, right? Yeah. And you've been contributing to this company managed trust for years. You're used to how it works, and now boom, there's this big change. You're gonna have questions, right? Maybe some concerns. Maybe you're even a little skeptical.
Sure, it's like switching banks, right? Even if it's for the best, it can still be a little unsettling to change something as important as your finances.
Exactly. So even though the form might not say it directly, communication and support from the organization, that's crucial during this time. They need to be ready to answer those questions, address those concerns, to just reassure their employees.
So it's not enough to just dot your I's and cross your T's on the paperwork. You gotta think about the people, right? Make sure they feel supported.
Exactly. It's about treating employees, treating them with respect.
Yeah.
Recognizing that their retirement savings, it's more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's their hard work. It's their dreams for the future.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the little details of this form to the bigger picture of how organizations make these choices. I feel like I have a much better understanding of how this whole system works.
Me too. Yeah. And it really shows how important these benefits are. There's this real commitment to making sure everything is transparent, everything is done the right way, and that the employees are they're protected.
Absolutely. And that brings us to one part of this form we haven't even talked about yet, the grounds of surrender, the core of this whole decision, really.
Right. This is where we get to see, the real reasons why companies decide to give up this exemption and go back to the EPFO.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of the most common reasons they give? Okay, so let's get into these grounds for surrender. It's like we're finally getting to the heart of the mystery, right? Why would a company decide to give up that control and go back to the EPFO?
Yeah, it is kind of like that. We've seen how the form makes sure that the transition is smooth and fair, but now we get to see the why. What are the reasons, the things that make an organization say, all right, we're done. EPFO, it's your turn now.
So what are some of the most common reasons that they give?
Well, one that comes up a lot is, they just can't maintain the trust effectively. Remember how we were talking about how managing a separate trust is not easy? It takes a lot of expertise, resources, and just a whole lot of, administrative work.
Right. It's not just collecting contributions and writing checks. There's a whole lot more to it. Regulations, investments, all that.
Exactly. And sometimes, organizations just realize they're just not equipped for it. Maybe they don't have the right staff, or their financial situation has changed, or maybe they just realize, hey, it's just easier to let the EPFO handle it.
So it's kind of like admitting you're in over your head and calling in the experts, right? Might be a little humbling, but probably the best thing to do in a lot of cases.
Definitely. And the form, it gives them a way to to say that, to acknowledge that they've reached their limit. It's not about blaming anybody. It's just about being honest and saying, hey, we need some help here.
I like that. It's good to see that kind of, that honesty, that awareness, especially when you're talking about something as important as people's retirement funds.
I agree. And this also relates to another common reason: changes within the organization itself, like their structure or their financial situation.
So it's not always about a lack of expertise. Sometimes it's just stuff happening that's outside their control.
Exactly. Think about it. Like a company, they might be perfectly capable of managing their own trust when they're smaller, independent. But then maybe they merge with another company, or they go through some big restructuring, or maybe their whole industry takes a hit. Suddenly, managing that trust, it's a lot bigger of a burden.
Right, like trying to balance a bunch of stuff while you're walking a tightrope. At some point, you gotta put some of it down, or you're gonna fall.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And in those situations, giving up the exemption, going back to the EPFO, it can be a good move. They can streamline things, save some money, and focus on those bigger problems.
Makes sense. Yeah. It's all about figuring out what's most important for the organization and for their employees. I gotta say, I'm a little surprised that more organizations don't just say, too much paperwork. Like, we've seen how much is involved in this form alone, and I can only imagine how much there is with managing a trust.
Yeah, it is interesting, right? It seems like the paperwork burden is definitely a factor, but a lot of organizations, they're willing to deal with it if it means they have more control over their benefits.
So it's a trade-off they're willing to make, at least for a while.
Well,
but it also shows that, giving up the exemption, it's not something they do, lightly. They're not just giving up because they're tired of doing paperwork.
It's a big decision, usually driven by a whole bunch of things: money, regulations, maybe even changes in their overall strategy.
Wow, we've really gone deep on this one, from trying to figure out this form to trying to understand why organizations make these choices. It's been really interesting.
Yeah, it has, and I think it really shows how even something like this, something that seems kind of technical and bureaucratic, it can really affect people, their lives, their finances, their future. It's a big deal.
For sure. And it shows how important it is to be transparent, to do things the right way, to make sure people feel like they're, that they understand what's going on.
Absolutely. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. We've explored the ins and outs of this form, the reasons behind it, and all the steps involved in this transition.
It's been a fascinating journey. We learned about retirement funds and oversight, and how important it is to put people first.
And it's amazing what you can learn from just one form, right? A form that most people probably never even think about.
Right. It just goes to show that there's always something new to discover, even in the most unexpected places. That's what that's what a deep dive is all about, right? Going beyond the surface and seeing what's really there.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to come up for air. But before we go, I want to I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've seen how India has this system that allows for both, oversight and individual control over those savings. It's a pretty interesting model, and it makes me wonder, could this work in other areas? Could it be a way to balance, individual choice with collective security in other parts of the financial world? That's definitely something I'll be thinking about. So until next time, deep divers, keep exploring. All right, buckle up, everyone, because today we're going deep into some, well, let's just say, fascinating territory.
Sounds intriguing. What are we diving into?
We're tackling, get this, the surrender of exemption from the employees' provident fund scheme in India.
Okay, I'll bite. That sounds like a mouthful and honestly, a bit complex.
Yeah, it might sound like we're wading through a bureaucratic swamp, but trust me, this stuff is interesting.
Right, you've got my attention. So where do we even begin with this whole surrender of exemption thing?
Well, first we got to lay some groundwork. We need to set the stage.
That's good. Give me the basics.
So imagine this. The Employees Provident Fund Scheme, or EPF, it's kind of like India's version of a supersized 401k.
Okay, I'm with you. A retirement savings plan, mandatory for most companies.
Exactly. It's meant to, provide that financial safety net for folks after they retire.
Got it. So where does this exemption part come in? Why would anyone want to be exempt from a good thing like that?
Well, some organizations, especially the big ones, they can actually get permission to opt out of directly participating in the EPF scheme.
They can just, say no thanks to this national retirement plan.
Pretty much. They get to manage their own retirement funds for employees, setting up their own, provident fund trusts.
So they go rogue, kind of like the rebels of the retirement world. But then we're talking about them surrendering this exemption, which means...
Exactly. They decide to come back to the fold, rejoining the standard EPF scheme managed by the Employees Provident Fund Organization, the EPFO.
That's kind of wild. It's like saying, okay, we tried it our way, but we actually trust you guys to handle our retirement funds better.
Now you're getting it. That's the million rupee question here. Why would they do that? It seems counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, for sure. What's the catch?
Well, we dug into a bunch of forms and guidelines from the EPFO, really trying to understand this whole process.
Oh, so this is where the real detective work begins, huh?
You could say that. It's like piecing together a puzzle, And from what we gathered, it seems there are a few factors at play.
Lay it on me. What did you find?
One big reason is that the EPFO, well, they've been stepping up their game lately, becoming way more reliable in managing those retirement funds.
Okay, so it's not your grandma's EPFO anymore. They've modernized.
Something like that. Organizations are seeing the advantage of letting the pros handle things, especially with all the complexities involved.
Makes sense. Less headache for them. Just hand over the reins to the experts.
Right. And then there's the whole standardization thing. An organization might want their employees to have the same, retirement benefits as everyone else in their industry.
Yeah, that makes them a more attractive employer, right? Keeps them competitive.
Exactly. Plus, think about it from the employee's perspective. Switching jobs and having to figure out a whole new retirement plan, it can be a pain.
For sure. Nobody wants to deal with that hassle.
Yeah.
Standardization simplifies things for everyone involved.
Totally. But how does the surrender actually happen? I'm looking at this stack of forms, and it's honestly a little intimidating.
Yeah, it's a pretty thorough process, that's for sure. We've got all these forms as our, roadmap to figure it out.
All right, so walk me through it. What are the major steps in this process?
Well, think of it as a multi-step dance. Mm-hmm. First, the organization, they got to submit an application to the EPFO, basically saying, hey, we want to surrender our exemption.
Like raising their hand in class, eager to rejoin the group.
Exactly. And then there's a period of verification. The EPFO, they scrutinize the organization's records, making sure everything's legit.
Due diligence, got to make sure everything's above board.
Right. Checking employee details, contribution history, the whole 9 yards. And once they're satisfied, there's this crucial step involving the organization's board of trustees.
So it's not just a decision made at the top. There's a whole layer of oversight involved.
You got it. They need to formally approve the surrender of exemption through a resolution.
That's interesting, like a checks and balances system to protect everyone's interests.
Exactly. The board is acting as the guardian of those employee retirement savings, ensuring this decision is actually good for them. And this is where things get really interesting.
Ooh, I love where this is going. What happens next?
Well, you see, When an organization surrenders their exemption, they're not just switching systems, they're also transferring all the funds they've accumulated for their employees back to the EPFO. They're called past accumulations.
Wow, that's a huge responsibility. I can only imagine the hoops they have to jump through to move all that money.
Oh, you have no idea. And that's where we're going to pick up in our next segment. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of financial scrutiny, enforcement officers, and special deposit schemes. It's a wild ride.
Okay, I am hooked. Who knew retirement plans could be this captivating? Stay tuned, everyone, because we're just getting started on this deep dive into the world of surrender of exemption.
It's going to be good.
Okay, so last time we were talking about these past accumulations, right? The retirement funds that organizations have been managing on their own. What happens to all that money when they decide to surrender their exemption and rejoin the EPF scheme?
Well, it's definitely not as simple as like cutting a check and calling it a day. It's a pretty involved process.
I bet. There must be tons of rules and regulations around transferring those funds.
Oh yeah, for sure. And all of it, thankfully, is laid out in these guidelines and forms.
Okay, so walk me through it. How does this financial handoff actually work?
All right, so imagine you're the organization. You've made the decision to surrender your exemption. Now, you got to gather up all those financial records related to your Provident Fund Trust, all those contribution details, investment statements, everything.
Sounds like a major undertaking, like a financial spring cleaning.
Pretty much.
All right.
And it's not just about organizing your own files either. Remember we talked about that third-party auditor?
Right, the independent expert who makes sure everything's legit.
Exactly. Well, they come in at this stage and really get into the weeds, making sure everything adds up.
So it's like a financial audit, ensuring there's no funny business going on.
Yep. They verify the total amount of those past accumulations and make sure everything aligns with the EPFO's rules.
Makes sense. Lots of checks and balances to protect those retirement funds. So once the auditor gives the thumbs up, what happens next? Do they just wire the money over to the EPFO?
Not quite. Here's where things get a little interesting. They use something called the Special Deposit Scheme with the State Bank of India.
The Special Deposit Scheme? That sounds kind of mysterious.
It is, but it's basically a dedicated channel for transferring these large sums of money. Super secure and specifically designed for this purpose.
Interesting. So it's like a high security pipeline for retirement funds.
Exactly. And, with all this back and forth, the audit, special schemes, I'm sure some people are thinking, why even bother?
I was just thinking the same thing. It seems like a lot of work. Why go through all this trouble?
Well, you got to remember, we're talking about people's retirement savings here, their financial security, their future.
Right. It's serious business.
Exactly. The EPFO wants to be absolutely sure that every rupee is accounted for, that the transfer is completely transparent, legitimate, and done by the book.
I get it. No cutting corners when it comes to people's livelihoods. But all this makes me wonder, who's the one making sure everyone follows the rules? Is there like a referee in all of this?
Great question. And yes, there is. That's where the enforcement officer steps in.
Ooh, the enforcement officer. Sounds a little intimidating.
Well, they're kind of like the EPFO's representative, on the ground, making sure the surrender of exemption happens smoothly and according to all the regulations.
So they're the ones making sure everyone's playing by the rules.
Yep. They review documents, verify calculations, basically act as the guardian of the whole process.
Yeah.
They even have the authority to conduct inspections and stuff.
Wow, they don't mess around. It's good to know there's someone looking out for the employee's best interests.
Absolutely. It shows how seriously the EPFO takes this whole thing. But, we've talked a lot about why organizations might choose to surrender their exemption, but are there any downsides?
Yeah, that's a good point. There must be some trade-offs, right? What are some of the challenges they might face?
Well, once they rejoin the EPF scheme, they have to play by the EPFO's rules. They lose some of that flexibility they had when managing their own funds.
So less control over investment strategies and such.
Right. And there's also the cost factor. The EPFO charges administrative fees for managing the funds, which could be higher than what the organization was paying before.
Okay, so it's a balancing act, weighing the benefits of standardization and expertise against the potential costs and loss of control.
Exactly. It's a complex decision with a lot of moving parts. But what I find really fascinating is how this whole trend could impact the future of retirement in India.
Yeah, it feels like a pretty significant shift. Where do you think this is all headed?
That's the big question, isn't it? And that's what we'll tackle in our final segment. The implications of this trend, could reach far beyond just these individual organizations and their employees.
This is getting good. Can't wait to hear what you have to say. Okay, so we've gone deep into the weeds on this surrender of exemption thing, learned about past accumulations, met the enforcement officer, the whole 9 yards. But now I'm thinking bigger picture, What does this trend actually mean for the future of, retirement in India?
Well, it's a good question. To be honest, it's hard to say for sure, but I think what we're seeing is a potential shift. The EPFO, they might be taking on a much bigger role in how retirement works in India.
Okay, that's interesting. But how so? What do you mean?
Think about it. As more and more organizations decide to rejoin the EPF scheme, all those funds the EPFO manages, it just keeps growing and growing. They have more resources, more investments to make. It gives them more influence.
Right. It's like they become this giant, the main player in the retirement game. But is that good for the everyday employee? Or is that something to be, worried about?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, a more powerful EPFO could actually lead to better standardization of retirement benefits. Imagine, no matter where you work, you can kind of expect a certain level of consistency in your retirement savings.
Yeah, no more of this patchwork of different plans and rules. That'd be great.
Right. And it can make it easier for people to change jobs too without having to worry about messing up their retirement. But, and this is a big but, can the EPFO handle all of this? Can they really manage all that growth effectively?
That's a good point. More power means more responsibility. Can they really step up and manage all those funds and members?
That's the challenge. It's one thing to manage funds for a smaller group, but this is potentially a massive increase in their workload. They're going to have to, really invest in themselves, upgrade their systems, get more people, the whole thing.
So it's kind of like they have this huge opportunity, but they got to be ready for it. If they can handle it, it could be a great thing for everyone.
Yeah, it really could. It's something we all need to watch closely. Employees, organizations, even policymakers. The choices made now, they're going to shape the future of retirement in India. But if the EPFO can really rise to the occasion, this could lead to a much more secure retirement for, millions of people.
Wow, that's a powerful thought. Who knew we'd be talking about the future of retirement from these forms about surrender of exemption?
Right. It's amazing what you can learn when you really start digging into these things.
Well said. And to our listeners, if you're interested in learning more, we've linked to those forms and circulars in the show notes. Go check them out.
Yeah, and as you explore, think about how this whole trend might impact your own retirement plan. What can you do now to make sure your future is secure?
Awesome advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those brains buzzing.
All right, get ready to dive into something you might not expect to be so interesting: retirement funds.
Retirement funds. Oh, yeah, it sounds a little dry. I know.
But trust me, this is a deep dive you won't want to miss.
Yeah, we're looking at a pretty interesting trend in India. Companies are starting to handle their employees' retirement savings a bit differently these days.
Yeah, and this is a big deal because we're talking about companies that once said, nah, we're good. We'll manage our own retirement funds, thanks. They basically opted out of the national system.
Exactly. The Employees Provident Fund Organization, the EPFO.
Yeah, the EPFO. But
it's like they went on a little financial adventure and now they're coming back home.
They're coming home, and we got to find out why.
We do, and to get to the bottom of it, we're going full-on financial detective.
Oh.
We're talking EPFO forms, guidelines, even this super detailed SOP on surrendering these exemptions.
Yeah, it's not exactly a beach read.
No, not at all.
But that's what we do here, right? We dig into the stuff most people avoid, like, a tax audit.
That's right.
So for our listeners who maybe haven't been, keeping up with their Indian retirement fund regulations lately, can you give us a quick breakdown of what this whole exemption thing is all about?
Sure. So the EPF, the Employees Provident Fund, it's basically a mandatory savings plan for pretty much every employee in India.
Okay.
It's kind of like their version of a 401k.
Right.
But here's the thing. Larger companies, they can apply to manage those funds themselves separately from the EPFO.
Okay, so they were basically saying, we got this. We can handle retirement better on our own.
Yeah, exactly. It's like setting up their own little private retirement kingdom. But now they seem to be changing their tune.
What's driving this homecoming, this return to the EPFO?
Well, a lot of it seems to stem from the fact that the EPFO has really upped its game.
Oh.
They've streamlined processes, they're offering better returns, and they've become way more transparent.
So are you saying these companies weren't necessarily doing a bad job? It's just that the EPFO has become a much more attractive option.
Yeah, kind of like, you could choose to manage your own investments, or you could have like a really well-regarded fund manager do it for you.
Right.
At a good price, especially when managing a huge retirement fund can be a real headache.
Yeah, for sure.
All the paperwork, the legal stuff, it all adds up.
So it's kind of a no-brainer in a way.
It's definitely tempting for a lot of companies.
But I'm guessing surrendering this exemption isn't as simple as just, sending an email saying, hey, we're back.
Oh, no, not at all.
There's got to be a whole process, a whole bureaucratic maze involved.
Yeah, and that's where that SOP we mentioned comes in.
Okay.
It lays out the entire procedure, with incredible detail. It's like a step-by-step guide to financial reintegration.
Okay. So let's break down this guide, shall we? What are some of the key steps involved?
Well, first things first. The company has to submit a formal application to the EPFO,
Okay.
outlining all the reasons why they want to surrender the exemption.
So it's not just a casual, we're back. They actually have to make a case for themselves.
Oh, yeah, they have to justify it. It shows how seriously the EPFO takes this whole process.
Okay, so they can't just waltz back in.
What?
There's a real level of scrutiny here. And who are they presenting this case to? Is there some sort of a panel of judges?
Well, not exactly judges, but it's definitely a multi-layered process. It starts at the regional EPFO office, then it goes up to the zonal level, and finally it reaches the head office.
My.
And at the top, we're talking about the Exempted Establishments Committee, or EEC, and then the Central Board of Trustees, also known as the CBT.
Okay, so it's a real bureaucratic odyssey.
It is.
But it sounds like they're really making sure these companies are serious about this,
Yeah.
not just playing financial hopscotch.
Absolutely.
And this isn't just rubber stamping applications, right? They're really digging deep into these companies, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. They scrutinize everything, from past investment strategies to the status of each individual employee's account.
I mean, we are talking about people's retirement savings here.
Exactly. So there's no room for mistakes, no shady dealings, none of that.
Makes sense. And this isn't just about the big picture either, right?
Right.
It's also about making sure each employee's contributions are tracked properly.
Absolutely. They look at those past accumulation statements, which are like, I guess you could say, financial passports for each employee's savings.
Okay.
And they make sure everything is transferred smoothly and accurately to their EPFO accounts.
So it's not just a lump sum transfer. They're meticulously tracking every rupee,
Every rupee.
making sure every employee gets what they're owed.
Yes. And just think about the scale of this.
Yeah.
We're talking about potentially millions of accounts,
Oh, wow.
each one needing that same level of attention to detail.
That's a massive operation.
It is.
But we've also talked about the human element here, right? How do they make sure employees aren't left in the dark during all of this?
Right. It's got to be unsettling having your retirement savings moved around, even if it's supposed to be for the best.
Yeah, for sure.
That's why the EPFO guidelines really emphasize clear and constant communication with employees.
Okay.
Companies have to not only get their consent, but also explain everything clearly so everyone understands what's happening.
So it's not just about checking boxes. It's about making sure employees feel informed and empowered throughout the whole process.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that these funds aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Right.
They represent real people's dreams, their hopes for a secure future.
It's really about building trust, isn't it?
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got this intricate process, layers of scrutiny, a real emphasis on transparency and accountability. But I'm guessing there are some potential downsides too, right? No system is perfect.
You're right, there are always trade-offs, and in this case, one of them is flexibility.
Okay.
Once a company rejoins the EPFO,
Yeah.
they have to play by the EPFO's rules.
So they lose some of the control they had.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit like trading in a custom-built sports car for a reliable family sedan.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, you gain stability, predictability, but you might lose some of that speed and agility.
Right, so it's a trade-off, more security and standardization, but maybe less control and customization.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And I'm sure the administrative costs associated with being part of the EPFO don't help either.
Yeah, those fees can definitely be a factor, especially for companies that were managing their funds pretty efficiently before.
So it's all a balancing act, right?
It is.
Weighing the pros and cons for both the company and its employees.
Exactly.
I've got to say, this is so much more nuanced than I initially imagined.
It really is.
We've gone from what seemed like a simple procedure to a deep dive into, well, the whole landscape of retirement in India.
Yeah, the motivations of companies, the role of employees, it's all connected.
And we're just getting started.
Yeah, we've only scratched the surface.
I'm ready to get into the nitty-gritty of the surrender process itself.
All right, let's do it.
Maybe that's where the real insights are hidden.
You never know. One thing that really stands out in these EPFO guidelines is this intense focus on transparency.
Yeah, it's like they're making sure every single rupee is accounted for, no questions asked.
Exactly. It's not just about moving money, it's about making sure there's no room for any doubt, any funny business.
How do they actually achieve that level of transparency? It can't just be paperwork, right?
Well, one crucial part is the role of third-party auditors.
Okay.
These are independent experts who come in and really scrutinize the company's financial records.
Okay.
They compare everything to the EPFO's regulations.
So it's like having financial detectives on the case.
Exactly. They're looking for any discrepancies, anything that doesn't add up, anything that might raise a red flag.
So they don't just take the company's word for it, there's this independent check.
Right, and remember, we're talking about companies that might have been managing their own funds for years. Decades even. So that's a lot of transactions, a lot of potential for things to slip through the cracks.
That makes sense. It's not just about the overall numbers, but also about each individual employee's contributions.
Absolutely. They scrutinize those past accumulation statements, making sure everything lines up perfectly for the transfer to the EPFO.
So they're tracking every single rupee.
Every single one.
To make sure each employee gets exactly what they're owed.
Precisely.
The scale of this is just mind-boggling.
It really is. Millions of accounts potentially.
Wow.
All needing that meticulous level of attention.
And how do they handle the communication with employees during this whole thing?
Right, because it's got to be nerve-wracking for them to have their retirement savings shifted around like that.
Even if it's ultimately a good thing.
Exactly, and that's why the EPFO guidelines are so big on clear communication.
Okay.
Companies have to not only get the employees' consent, but also make sure they understand what's happening every step of the way.
So it's not just a formality, it's about giving employees a voice, making them feel like they're part of the process.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that these aren't just abstract financial transactions. We're talking about people's livelihoods, their futures.
It's really about respecting those individual stories, isn't it?
It is.
So we've got this intricate process, all these safeguards, a real focus on transparency and accountability, but I imagine there are some downsides too, right?
Of course, there are always trade-offs. And in this case, one of the biggest ones is flexibility.
Okay.
Once a company rejoins the EPFO, they have to operate within that framework.
So they lose some of the freedom they had before.
Exactly. Like we were saying before, it's kind of like trading in that custom sports car for a reliable family sedan.
Right. You get the stability, but maybe you miss that speed and agility.
Precisely.
And I imagine the administrative costs that come with being part of the EPFO don't make things easier either.
No, those fees can definitely add up, especially for companies that were running a tight ship before.
So it's really a balancing act for these companies.
It is, weighing the pros and cons. Trying to find that sweet spot between security and control.
It's fascinating to see how this is all playing out.
Yeah, it's a really dynamic situation.
And we're still in the early stages, right?
We are.
Who knows what the long-term implications will be?
It's going to be interesting to watch.
And that's what makes this deep dive so intriguing. It's not just about understanding the rules and procedures. It's about looking at the bigger picture.
Exactly.
What does this all mean for retirement in India?
Yeah. And for the relationship between companies and employees?
It's a whole ecosystem, really.
It is.
We're just starting to explore it.
We are. And in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to tackle some of those big picture questions.
Okay.
What are the potential scenarios for the future?
Yeah, what does this mean for individual choice?
Exactly. And for the role of the government in retirement planning.
I can't wait to unravel those final layers.
Me neither.
Okay, so we've explored the ins and outs of this whole EPF exemption surrender process. We've looked at the regulations, the motivations, the potential downsides.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is, but now I think it's time to step back and look at the bigger picture.
You mean, like, what does this all mean for the future of retirement in India?
Exactly. What are the long-term implications of this trend? What possible scenarios might unfold?
Well, one thing that seems pretty clear is that the EPFO is going to become even more powerful.
Yeah, I can see that happening.
As more and more companies rejoin the system, Their pool of funds grows, their influence expands.
They're becoming the go-to for retirement in India.
It's like they're the architects of retirement security for a huge chunk of the workforce.
And that comes with a lot of responsibility, right?
Absolutely. There are definitely both opportunities and challenges.
Okay, like what?
Well, on the one hand, this could lead to a more standardized retirement system. Employees across different companies and industries would have a certain level of consistency in their benefits.
That sounds like a good thing for employees.
It could be, especially for those who change jobs a lot.
Right.
Or work in sectors where retirement plans haven't always been so great.
So, less uncertainty, more peace of mind.
Exactly.
But what about the downsides? There's always another side to the coin.
Of course, one concern is whether the EPFO can actually handle this increased workload
Okay.
without sacrificing efficiency or transparency.
Right, because sometimes bigger isn't always better.
Exactly. And there's also the question of their investment strategy. The EPFO has a specific approach, which might not be the best fit for everyone.
So some companies might be giving up potentially higher returns.
Potentially, yeah, it's a trade-off.
It's always a trade-off, isn't it?
It seems to be, and then there's the even bigger question of individual choice.
Right, we touched on that before.
As the EPFO becomes more powerful, will there still be room for alternative approaches to retirement planning?
Yeah, it's that classic balance between individual freedom and collective security.
Exactly. How do we find that sweet spot?
It's a question for every society, really.
It is, and there's no easy answer.
No, it's about finding the right balance for everyone.
And staying informed, keeping an eye on how things evolve.
So we can make the best decisions for ourselves and for our communities.
Exactly. It's an ongoing conversation.
Well, I think this has been an incredibly enlightening deep dive.
I agree.
We started with what seemed like a simple question about companies and their retirement funds.
Yeah.
And we ended up exploring some.
That's a goal worth striving for, a conversation worth having.
So until next time, keep diving deep, keep those brains buzzing, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.
See you then.